The millionaire CEO never believed in fate, until two small boys with a rag and a coin changed everything in less than 60 seconds. Owen Blake had always prided himself on discipline, precision, and a tight morning schedule. As the CEO of a powerful investment firm, every minute of his day was calculated, and this morning was no exception. He had a high-stakes meeting in less than an hour, and his thoughts were already deep in the numbers, the pitch, the people he needed to convince. His sleek black SUV cut smoothly through the city traffic, and he barely registered the street around him until a sudden tapping on his window forced him to slow down. Two boys, maybe 6 years old, stood on the edge of the sidewalk holding a battered plastic bottle of water and a rag that had clearly seen better days. They were twins, identical in every way, same light brown hair, same striking blue eyes, same oversized t-shirts that hung off their small frames. One of them grinned and pointed at the headlights of Owen's car. "Mister, we can clean your lights real fast." "Just 50 cents, the boy said, his voice hopeful but not desperate. Owen's first instinct was to wave them off and keep going. He didn't stop for things like this. He didn't have time. But something, he couldn't say what, made him pause. He rolled down the window and looked at them more closely. Their faces were dirty, but their expressions were bright. There was something about their eyes that pulled at a thread deep inside him, a strange tug of familiarity he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Here," he said, handing it to the boy nearest him. "Keep it. No need to clean anything." For a moment, they just stared at the bill like it might disappear. Then one of them whispered, "Thank you," with such genuine gratitude it made Owen feel oddly unsettled. He nodded, shifted the car back into drive, and pulled away. But as he drove toward the towering glass building that was his second home, his focus slipped. Numbers blurred. The pitch he had rehearsed all morning faded. All he could see were those two boys, standing on the corner with two thin arms and two familiar eyes, offering to work for scraps. He shook his head, trying to push the image away, but it clung to him like fog. The moment he stepped into the office, surrounded by polished floors, sharp suits, and coffee-fueled conversations, he knew he wasn't fully there. He went through the motions, greeted his assistant, answered questions, nodded at updates, but the thought kept circling. Who were those boys? Why had they looked so familiar? Why couldn't he stop thinking about them? By mid-afternoon, he gave in to the instinct he usually ignored. He left the office without explanation, got into his car, and drove straight back to the intersection. And when he arrived, the boys were still there, rags in hand, waiting for another car to stop. Something in his chest tightened, and he rolled down the window again. This time, he planned to ask them more than just what they were doing. Because some part of him already knew the answer would change everything. As Owen pulled up to the same corner, he noticed the boys hadn't moved much from the spot where he'd seen them earlier that morning. The sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the cracked sidewalk, but they were still there, still hopeful, still holding on to that rag and bottle as if it were their only tool for survival. He parked across the street and sat for a few moments, just watching them. They weren't approaching every car anymore. Instead, they had taken to sitting on the curb, their heads bowed slightly in what looked like exhaustion or maybe disappointment. Owen stepped out of his car and crossed the street slowly. He didn't want to startle them, but as soon as they saw him approaching, both boys jumped to their feet. The one who had spoken earlier gave a tentative smile. "Mister. You came back. You forgot something?" he asked, clutching the rag with both hands. Owen stopped a few feet away and looked down at them. Up close, the resemblance was even stronger than he remembered. Their faces were narrow but not sharp, cheeks slightly sunken from lack of proper meals, but their eyes, their bright, clear blue eyes, held something deep, something unshakably familiar. "No," Owen said quietly. "I didn't forget anything. I just wanted to ask you a question." The boys looked at each other, then back at him. "Okay, the second one said carefully. He had been quieter earlier, but now his gaze was bolder. Owen crouched down, suddenly aware of how tall he must look to them, how different his tailored clothes and watch seemed next to their worn-out sneakers and faded shirts. "Why are you out here doing this? Cleaning cars?" They hesitated. The first one glanced at his brother, then back at Owen. "Because we need money." "For what?" Owen asked, his voice gentle but firm. The boys exchanged another glance, and this time the second one answered. "Our mom is in the hospital. We want to help pay for her medicine." Owen felt something slam into him, guilt, shock, disbelief, maybe all of it at once. He looked at them again, really looked, and realized they were standing in front of him not just as kids trying to make a few dollars, but as sons trying to protect the only parent they had. "Where is your mom?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice even. The first boy pointed down the street. "She's at County General. We go there every night. She says not to worry, but we heard the nurse say it costs too much." Owen felt the weight of their words press against his chest like a stone. "What's her name?" They hesitated again, but this time they answered in unison. "Emily Raines." Everything stopped. Owen's heart missed a beat, then another. He stood up slowly, blinking as the name settled into his mind like a ghost returning home. Emily. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, but it had once meant everything to him. She had vanished from his life without warning, taking with her the quiet kind of love that he had never found again. And now here he was, standing in front of two boys with her eyes, her face, and maybe, just maybe, his blood. He swallowed, then crouched again. "Can you take me to her?" The boys looked unsure for a moment, but then nodded. "We were going there soon anyway," the first one said. Owen walked with them, every step drawing him closer to a truth he had never imagined. The hospital came into view, gray and distant at first, then all too real. His pulse thundered in his ears as they walked through the sliding doors and into the sterile brightness of the lobby. As one of the boys led him to the third floor, Owen's chest tightened. His thoughts spun, but one remained painfully clear: if Emily was here, and these boys were hers, there was only one explanation. And he wasn't ready for it. But he needed to know. The walk down the hospital corridor felt longer than it was. Owen's shoes echoed softly on the polished linoleum, but it wasn't the sound that filled his head, it was his heartbeat, pounding hard and uneven, and the voices of the two boys walking ahead of him, whispering to each other like this was something they had done 100 times before. He studied their movements, the way they seemed to know exactly where to go, as if the hospital had become a second home. He hated that thought, hated the idea that children this young were so comfortable in a place like this. He also hated that he had never known they existed. When they reached room 317, one of the boys stopped and turned around. "She's in there," he said, and though his voice was calm, Owen could see the nervousness in the way his fingers tightened around the doorknob. The other boy didn't speak at all. He just looked at Owen with a steady expression, one that seemed far too serious for someone his age. Owen nodded and stepped forward slowly. Inside, the room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint hum of air conditioning. The woman in the hospital bed was turned slightly toward the window, her profile lit gently by the fading afternoon light. Even before she moved or opened her eyes, Owen knew it was her. Emily. Her hair was longer now, but he would have recognized her anywhere. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her hands resting weakly on the blanket, it all came rushing back like a wave crashing into his chest. He stood there for several seconds, unsure whether to speak or wait, and then her eyes opened. They took a moment to focus, then landed directly on him. At first, there was confusion, maybe even fear, but it melted quickly into something else. Her lips parted slightly, and a whisper escaped before she could stop it. "Owen." He took one slow step forward, his voice rough with disbelief. "It's me." She blinked several times, as if convincing herself she wasn't dreaming, then tried to sit up, wincing as she moved. He rushed forward instinctively, stopping just short of touching her. "Don't," he said. "It's okay. Just rest." Her eyes searched his face, scanning for answers. What are you doing here?" "I saw them," he said quietly, gesturing toward the hallway. "They were trying to wash car headlights. They said their mom was in the hospital." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again with a sigh that carried years of exhaustion. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." Owen stepped closer, now letting himself look at her properly. She was thinner than he remembered, pale and clearly weak, but still beautiful in that quiet, effortless way she had always been. "Are they mine?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Emily didn't answer immediately. Her eyes welled with tears, and her chin trembled slightly. "Yes," she said finally, and that one word changed everything. "Their names are Caleb and Mason. They're 6. Owen felt like the floor had been pulled out from under him. 6 years. 6 birthdays. 6 whole years he had missed. He backed away slightly, struggling to take in the weight of what he had just heard. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was going to," she said quickly. "But then I saw how fast your life was moving. I didn't want to trap you or ruin what you had. I convinced myself it would be better if I raised them on my own." "That wasn't your choice to make," he said, harsher than he intended. Emily winced but nodded, accepting it. "I know. And I'm sorry. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I thought I was doing the right thing at the time." Owen turned away, walking slowly to the window and staring out at the city below. His mind was spinning, full of the sound of Caleb's laughter, the way Mason had looked at him without fear, the sudden realization that he had 2 sons who had grown up without him. After a long pause, he turned back toward her. "I want to be part of their lives," he said. "I don't know how or what that looks like yet, but I want to be there. I've already missed too much." Emily looked at him with a mix of hope and pain. "They're good boys. You'd be proud of them." "I already am," he whispered, and for the first time since stepping into that room, he smiled. It was faint, almost unsure, but it was real. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek and leaned back against the pillow. Outside the door, the boys waited, leaning against the wall, unaware that the man they had tried to help that morning had just discovered he was their father. And though none of them knew it yet, the day that began with dirty headlights had just turned into the beginning of a very different future. Owen didn't remember the drive home that night. His hands had gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were sore by the time he pulled into his driveway, but his mind was nowhere near his sleek house or the life he had built over the years. Every thought was with the 2 boys who had stood on a street corner offering to clean headlights, and the woman he had once loved, still loved in a quiet, unresolved way, lying weak and pale in a hospital bed. He had never been good with stillness, with sitting and thinking, but that night he didn't touch his phone or turn on the lights. He sat in the dark living room for hours, trying to process what it all meant. He was a father. Twice over. For 6 years, he had unknowingly missed everything: first steps, birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, fears of the dark, their first words. And worse, they had needed help, and he hadn't been there. The next morning he showed up at the hospital just after sunrise, carrying a bag of things he thought might help: a few snacks, small toys, coloring books, and 2 sets of clean clothes he had guessed sizes for in a quiet aisle at the 24-hour store. The boys were asleep in 2 plastic chairs outside their mother's room, curled up together under one thin hospital blanket. He didn't want to wake them. He just sat across the hall, watching them breathe, trying to understand how he had missed the signs all this time. Eventually, a nurse came by and gently stirred the boys awake. They blinked sleepily and then lit up when they saw Owen. It surprised him, the way they smiled without hesitation, as if they had known him forever. "Hi," Mason said. "You came back." "I said I would," Owen replied, crouching down to their level and offering them the bags. "Got you some stuff." Thought maybe you could use something warm. Caleb took a peek and his eyes widened. You got us Spider-Man socks. Owen smiled. Lucky guess. The boys sat down on the floor right there in the hallway and started unpacking the bags with excitement. For a moment, they weren't two boys trying to carry the weight of a hospital bill. They were just kids. And Owen felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. Later that day, when Emily was awake and stronger, Owen asked her about everything. Not just the past, but the present. How she had managed alone. Where she worked. What she needed. At first, she resisted, not out of pride, but out of fear that accepting his help now would only bring confusion to the boys' lives. They've lived this way for so long, she said softly. I don't want them to feel like something's wrong with how it's been. He nodded, understanding her concern, but he also knew that what had been normal for them didn't have to stay that way. What if I just started by showing up, he asked. Nothing more. Just showing up. Emily agreed, and so Owen began spending every free hour at the hospital or with the boys. He helped with their homework in the waiting room, brought them real meals instead of vending machine snacks, and started reading to them each night before they curled up on the makeshift mattress that the nurses helped lay out. Sometimes, the three of them would just sit in silence, drawing or playing quiet games on the hospital floor while Emily slept. The more time Owen spent with them, the more their personalities unfolded in front of him. Caleb was the talker, always full of questions and impossible facts about space and animals. Mason was the observer, quieter but no less sharp, and deeply thoughtful. They were curious and funny, sometimes stubborn, and entirely captivating. And the most stunning part was how easily they accepted him, how instinctively they folded him into their world, even before they fully knew who he was. One evening, after a long day of tests and hospital routines, Mason tugged at Owen's sleeve and asked, "Do you think my mom will get better now that you're here?" The question hit Owen straight in the chest, unexpected and heavy. He didn't lie. "I don't know," he said gently. "But I promise she's not alone anymore. And neither are you." Mason nodded and leaned against his side, quiet and trusting. That night, Owen stayed until they all fell asleep. And as he sat beside Emily's bed, listening to her steady breathing, he realized something else. He had thought success was power, control, and wealth. But in that quiet hospital room, with his sons asleep on the floor and Emily beside him, he finally understood what success really meant. It meant showing up, being present, and choosing love even after years of absence. And for the first time in a long time, Owen didn't feel lost. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The following week brought a quiet shift neither Owen nor Emily could ignore. The hospital days were long, filled with endless checkups, medication charts, and the soft beeping of machines, but something about Owen's constant presence had begun to reshape the rhythm of everything. The boys now asked when he would arrive, not if. They looked for him in the hallway before breakfast trays arrived and raced to him the moment they heard his voice. He became part of their routine so effortlessly, it almost felt like he had always been there. Emily noticed it most in the small things. Owen didn't just show up. He paid attention. He brought Caleb's favorite juice after overhearing him mention it once. He remembered that Mason liked his toast extra crispy and that both boys were terrified of elevators. And he didn't just care for them, he asked questions about Emily's health, took notes during doctor visits, and offered to cover expenses without turning it into charity. At first, she resisted, not out of pride, but out of fear that letting him do too much would blur the fragile lines between past and present. But then she saw how gentle he was with the boys, how patient, and how much they had already started to love him without understanding the full truth. One evening, just as the sun was dipping behind the city skyline, casting the hospital room in a soft amber glow, Emily found herself watching Owen as he read to the boys. They were curled up beside him, heads resting on his arms, eyes heavy but still fixed on the page. He was reading slowly, doing the voices, adding just enough drama to keep them laughing even through their yawns. When the story ended, he tucked the blanket around them and whispered something Emily couldn't hear. Then he turned to her, not realizing she had been watching so intently. He walked over quietly, pulling the chair beside her bed. "They're asleep," he said with a small smile. "Out before the dragon got to the second castle." She smiled too, then looked away, her fingers nervously adjusting the edge of her blanket. "They like you," she said. "A lot." Owen leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I like them too. More than I thought I was even capable of." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I missed everything, Emily. Their first steps. Their first words. I didn't even know they existed. That's a weight I don't know how to carry yet." Emily swallowed hard. "I never meant to take that from you." "I know," he said softly. "I believe you. But they need to know now. They deserve to know who I am. From us, not just from what they'll figure out on their own." She hesitated, glancing toward the sleeping boys. "What if it confuses them? What if they don't want you in that way?" "Then I'll wait," he said. "But I won't lie to them. I won't pretend to be something else. And I won't leave." Emily looked back at him, her eyes filled with something that hovered between fear and hope. "Okay," she said. "We tell them tomorrow." That night, Owen couldn't sleep. He lay on the small couch in the corner of the room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. But when morning came, and the boys were awake and full of their usual energy, he realized there was no perfect moment for a truth like this. There was only honesty. So after breakfast, while they were sitting together coloring at the foot of Emily's bed, she cleared her throat and called them over. "Caleb, Mason," she said gently, "we need to talk to you about something important." They looked up, curious but calm, and climbed onto the bed beside her. She glanced at Owen, and he nodded. "You know how you don't have a dad," she began. The boys looked at each other and nodded. "Well," she continued slowly, "that's not exactly true." Mason tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Owen stepped closer, kneeling down so he could look them in the eyes. "It means that I'm your dad," he said quietly. "I didn't know until recently, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there before, but I am now. And I want to be, if you'll let me." For a moment, the boys were completely silent. Then Caleb blinked and asked, "You mean you're our real dad?" Owen nodded. "Yes." Mason looked at Emily, who gave a tiny nod through her tears. Then he turned back to Owen and said, "Can you still do the dragon voices?" Owen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Absolutely," he said. And in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. The days that followed felt different. Not easier, not less complicated, but softer somehow. Something had shifted between all of them the moment the boys knew the truth, and though they didn't ask many questions, Owen could sense the way they watched him more closely now, the way they leaned into him when he arrived, the way their expressions changed when he said he'd come back tomorrow and actually did. He kept his word without fail, and to two boys who had lived with so much uncertainty, that alone was everything. Emily, meanwhile, was recovering slowly. The treatment had helped, and she was gaining strength day by day, but she tired easily, and her body still carried the fragility of someone who had been pushing too hard for too long. Owen noticed the way she hid her pain when the boys were in the room, the way she smiled even when her hands trembled or her back ached. He started doing more without asking, refilling her water before she could reach for it, coordinating with the nurses, bringing books and quiet music to help her rest. Emily didn't fight it anymore. She let him take care of things. She let herself lean a little, not just physically but emotionally, even if she wasn't sure what it meant. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep and the hospital wing had grown quiet, Owen found her sitting up in bed with the blanket draped across her lap, staring at the dark window. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a reading lamp, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that didn't need to be filled. "You're good with them," she said quietly, her voice almost fragile. It surprises me. I don't know why. He sat down in the chair beside her and leaned back. It surprises me too, he admitted. I spent so long being afraid of everything I couldn't control. I thought having a family meant losing myself. I didn't know it would feel like finding something I didn't know was missing. She looked at him carefully, as if seeing him for the first time again. They've changed since you came. Lighter. Safer. Like the world got a little bigger for them. Owen rested his elbows on his knees and rubbed his palms together slowly. I don't deserve them. Or you. But I'm here. And I want to be more than someone who stops by. I want to build something with them. With you, if there's still space for that. Emily turned her gaze back to the window, quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw but honest. You hurt me when you disappeared from my life, even if you didn't know you had. I told myself I was okay, that I didn't need anyone. And then I broke, alone, with 2 little boys who depended on me. I've carried all of that for years. Owen didn't interrupt. He let her say it, every syllable of truth that she had held in her chest. She wasn't saying it to blame him. She was saying it to release it. I'm not asking you to fix the past, she added. But if you really want to be part of this, then be here for the hard parts. Be here when it's messy. Don't run when it's uncomfortable. He nodded, his voice low and steady. I won't run again. And she believed him. The next morning, Owen arrived early with breakfast for everyone. Real food, not hospital trays. The boys grinned from ear to ear when they saw pancakes stacked in a box and strawberries packed in small containers. Emily smiled too, and for the first time, it wasn't weighed down by worry. They all ate together in that tiny hospital room, legs crossed on the bed and floor, syrup dribbling onto napkins and laughter bouncing off the walls. A nurse passed by and paused in the doorway just long enough to smile before moving on. After breakfast, Mason crawled into Owen's lap and asked if they could go to a real park one day, not just walk in hospital corridors. Owen looked to Emily, who nodded slowly. Soon, she said. When I'm better. We'll wait, Caleb added, taking her hand. We're good at waiting. Owen pulled them both close. You won't have to anymore. In that moment, Emily looked at the 3 of them together and knew, despite everything, that her boys would be okay. And maybe, for the first time in years, so would she. When Emily was finally discharged from the hospital, the air outside felt brighter, almost too bright after so many weeks under fluorescent lights and whispered conversations. The boys were ecstatic, running ahead on the sidewalk, their small backpacks bouncing as they took turns holding their mother's hand. Owen followed close behind, carrying the larger bag with the hospital paperwork, prescriptions, and everything else that had quietly become part of their reality. They didn't go back to her old apartment, not right away. It was a cramped 3rd-floor walk-up with flickering hallway lights and stairs too steep for someone still healing. Instead, Owen brought them to his place, not as a grand gesture, but as a temporary bridge, just until she regained her strength, just until the boys could breathe in a space that didn't feel like survival. The boys adjusted faster than expected. They claimed the guest room within minutes, dragging their things across the carpet, arguing over who got which pillow, then falling asleep that night curled up in the same bed without complaint. Emily took the downstairs room, still moving carefully, her body not quite her own yet. Owen gave her space, never pushing, always asking first. He brought her tea in the mornings, gave her control over the little things, the curtains open or closed, the music on or off, where to place the plant she liked near the window. He never made her feel like a guest. She noticed. In the quiet moments between their new routines, something unspoken began to form again between them. It wasn't just about the past or the children. It was the way Owen looked at her when she laughed, like he hadn't heard that sound in years and couldn't quite believe it was back. It was the way Emily paused when she passed him in the kitchen, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. It was the comfort of silence that didn't demand explanation and the ease of slipping into old habits without realizing it. One evening, after the boys were asleep and the dishes were drying in the rack, Emily found herself standing at the edge of the living room, watching Owen fix the corner of a blanket they had left on the couch. He wasn't doing it for show. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply living inside the space he had built to include them. She stepped forward without really thinking. He turned just as she reached him. Neither of them said anything at first. Then she asked, softly, "Are you scared?" He met her gaze. Of what? Of all of this. Of what it means to try again. Owen smiled, but it wasn't the polished one she remembered from press events or old photographs. It was quieter. Real. "I'm terrified," he said. "But I'm more afraid of not trying at all." She nodded, then reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They stood there for a long time, saying nothing more. Over the next few days, Owen started including the boys in more of his world. He brought them to the office one morning when he only had half a day of meetings. His team, used to his rigid efficiency, was stunned to see him walk in with two 6-year-olds in mismatched socks asking where the vending machine was. He introduced them like they belonged there, like he was proud, not embarrassed. And he was. When they drew rockets on the whiteboard in his private meeting room, he left the drawings there all week. At home, they made pancakes on Sunday mornings, burning the first few and laughing until flour coated the floor. Emily sat on the counter watching the chaos unfold and didn't once try to stop it. She looked healthier now, the color back in her face, her voice stronger, her movements less cautious. She still tired easily, but she no longer hid it. When she needed to rest, she let Owen take over, and he did, without question, without hesitation. One night, after the boys had gone to bed and the house had settled into a warm hush, Owen stepped out onto the porch and found Emily already sitting there wrapped in one of his sweaters. She looked at him with a question in her eyes but didn't speak. He sat beside her and handed her a cup of tea. They watched the stars for a while, breathing in sync. Then she said, "They're happy." He nodded. "So am I." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move. They stayed like that, quiet and still, as if afraid to wake the moment. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was theirs. And it was real. It started with a small box on the kitchen counter, sealed with colorful tape and a sticker that read, "Our Family Plan." Owen found it one morning while making coffee, and at first, he thought it was a joke. But when he opened it, inside were 6 hand-drawn pictures, each on a separate piece of paper. The first was of a house, simple, square, with a chimney and trees and 4 smiling stick figures out front. The second showed a dog they didn't have, with "Someday" written in crayon above it. The third was a giant pancake with blueberries, the boys' favorite. The fourth was a playground. The fifth was a rocket ship with all their names written along the side. And the last one was a heart, cracked down the middle, and then stitched back together. It was labeled "Healed." He stood there staring at the drawings, the weight of it slowly sinking in. He didn't need to ask who had made them. This was their way of telling him they were ready for more, that their little family, built out of coincidence and overdue truths, was ready for the next chapter. That weekend, they moved into a new house just outside the city, not too far from his office, but with enough space for a yard, a swing set, and sunlight in every room. It wasn't the mansion he had once thought he'd end up in. It was better. The walls were empty at first, but within days the boys had filled them with drawings, magnets, and paper cutouts. Emily claimed the kitchen like she'd been born in it, and soon the entire house smelled like cinnamon and clean linen. Owen built bookshelves, helped assemble furniture with Mason perched on the box reading instructions aloud, and Caleb pretending to be the supervisor. It was messy. It was loud. And it was everything he hadn't realized he wanted. They settled into a rhythm that made sense, even if it didn't follow any blueprint. Mornings were full of rushing and cereal spills and someone always forgetting their backpack. Evenings were slower, dinner around the table, stories under blankets, small hands reaching for reassurance. Emily kept healing, stronger with each passing day, her laughter more frequent, her eyes brighter. Owen still had work, meetings, responsibilities that pulled at him, but he never let them take precedence. His calendar had been rearranged, not just professionally, but emotionally. His sons came first. Emily came first. Everything else followed. One night, not long after they'd moved, Emily came downstairs after the boys had gone to bed and found Owen sitting on the floor in the living room surrounded by photo albums. He had ordered prints of all the pictures he'd taken since the hospital, first meals, the boys in the office, Emily smiling in the sun for the first time in months. She sat beside him without a word and flipped through the pages. There were gaps, of course. Years he hadn't been there for. But they were filling them in now. Together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. A ring. Not because he wanted to claim her. But because he wanted to ask. Slowly, carefully, he took her hand. "I know we're already a family," he said quietly. "But if it's all right with you, I want to spend the rest of my life reminding you of that. Every day." Emily didn't cry. She smiled. A deep, certain kind of smile. "Yes," she whispered. "For all the days we missed. And all the ones ahead." When they told the boys the next morning, they both shouted the same thing in unison: "Does this mean we get cake?" Later that afternoon, they baked one together, lopsided, with too much frosting, but perfect in its own way. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. There would be arguments, scraped knees, spilled milk, missed calls. But there would also be birthdays, first days of school, sleepy hugs, pancakes on Saturdays, and 4 names on the mailbox. They had come together through the most unexpected path, with pain and distance and silence between them, but they had found their way back. Not to the life they had imagined, but to the life that had been waiting for them all along. And that made all the difference.